This is Lola, the family cat. You might have noticed that cats' pupils are vertical slits when the illumination is high, unlike human pupils, which are circular. There's a reason for that. Slit-shaped pupils allow animals that are active during the night and the day to see in very low light, as well as in very bright light. And there's another reason, actually, why they're vertical in domestic cats rather than at some other angle. Given what Lola needs to do to survive, her eyes are perfectly designed. William Paley was an English clergyman, a Christian apologist, a philosopher, and a utilitarian. You can look up the word utilitarianism in the glossary. This will come up later on in the course. Paley's best known for his exceptionally clear exposition of the design argument for the existence of God in his 1802 book, Natural Theology, or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity, collected from the appearances of nature. The excerpt in the Norton Anthology starts with Paley's famous example of the watch and the stone, going for a walk in the green and pleasant English countryside. We come across a stone, nothing surprising there. As Paley says, for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever. On the other hand, if we come across a watch, then that is surprising. What is the explanation? Why is the watch there? How did it come into existence? Paley thinks the reasonable conclusion is that it must have had an artificer who understood its mechanism and designed its use. Here is the design argument in the case of the watch. Let H be the hypothesis that the watch was designed by an agent or agents. We start by noting some facts about the watch. For instance, if the several parts had been differently shaped, the watch would not work, or not work as well. The watch also has a dial on which numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on are inscribed. It has hands which move smoothly around the dial. From this and similar premises, we conclude that the watch has a function. It's supposed to do something, namely to indicate time. Now, the claim is going to be that H, the hypothesis that the watch was designed, is the best explanation of this fact, Pn. We need a couple of other premises. It would be worth discussing why they, or premises similar to them, are needed. The first, Pn plus 1, is that H would explain the truth of Pn much better than any other hypothesis. It's not just that H would explain the truth of Pn, rather H would do a much better job of explaining the truth of Pn than any rival hypotheses. And the second premise we need, Pn plus 2, is that H would give a good explanation of Pn. It's not just that H is the best candidate explanation from a pool of not very good explanations. So from these premises, Pn plus 1, Pn plus 2, we derive the conclusion that H is true. There must have existed an artificer or artificers who comprehended the watch's construction and designed its use. And we can give a parallel argument in the case of the eye. Let H be the hypothesis that the eye was designed by some agent. We start by noting some facts about the eye, which we've learnt by observing and examining it. For instance, if the several parts had been differently shaped, the eye would not work, or not work as well. It has a fancy adjustable lens. There are a bunch of complicated photoreceptors at the back of the eye, and so on. From these premises, we conclude that the watch has a function. It's supposed to do something, namely to enable vision, to allow the organism to see. As before, we need our two extra premises, Pn plus 1. H would explain the truth of Pn much better than any other hypothesis, and Pn plus 2. H would give a good explanation of Pn, not just the best explanation from a pool of not very good candidate explanations. And as before, we conclude that H is true. There must have existed an artificer or artificers who comprehended the eye's construction and designed its use. And of course, we can repeat this kind of argument for nature as a whole. There is apparent design everywhere we look in the living world. Now, there are some immediate problems with Paley's version of the design argument. The most obvious one concerns Pn plus 1, that H would explain the truth of Pn much better than any other hypothesis. And indeed, it wasn't that much later, in 1859, when Darwin published The Origin of Species, giving what is widely regarded as a much better explanation of the function of biological systems than the theistic hypothesis. So that's one problem with Paley's version of the design argument. And another problem is that even if the argument works to some extent, it seems to fall far short of establishing a creator and architect of the universe. All we get is a creator and architect of life, but that could be some powerful space alien, powerful enough to create life on Earth, but not powerful enough to create the universe itself. But all is not lost for the design argument. There is a late 20th century version of it called the fine-tuning argument, which we're going to examine next.